In Cottonwood Springs, Texas, a 72-year-old rancher was about to endure a gang's swaggering provocation. A morning of fence mending turned dangerous when the steel vultures rumbled into town, their engines loud enough to rattle windows and tempers. Hank Walker wasn't your typical small-town cattleman. For a decade in the U.S. Army Special Forces, he was the man called in when missions went sideways, famed for calming hot situations before they turned bloody. When the steel vultures cornered him by the feed store, they had no idea his nearest neighbor was Chuck Norris. The martial arts legend positioned himself with quiet precision, setting in motion a counter-move that would ripple through the gang's pride, the sheriff's night, and the town's peace. What began as a roadside show of disrespect would become a midnight reckoning. Cottonwood Springs would never be the same after the night. The wrong bikers chose the wrong rancher and found Chuck Norris waiting in the dark. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun crept above the horizon, painting long shadows across Hank Walker's land. At 72, his movements had slowed, but his hands remained sure as he mended the fence line that separated his ranch from Chuck Norris's property. 40 years of Texas summers had weathered his skin to leather, and decades of hard work had bent his frame slightly forward, as if he were perpetually leaning into the prairie wind. "Hand me that wire cutter, Tommy," Hank said, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of a man who spoke only when necessary. Tommy Alvarez, barely 17 and full of restless energy, passed the tool with poorly concealed impatience. "We've been at this section for an hour, Mr. Walker. Wouldn't it be faster to just replace the whole stretch?" Hank smiled slightly. "Faster ain't always better, son. This fence has weathered more storms than you've had birthdays. Just needs a little attention in the right places." Across the property line, Chuck Norris stacked hay bales with methodical precision. Though in his 80s, he moved with the fluid economy of a much younger man. He acknowledged Hank with a brief nod, but offered no conversation. They had been neighbors for 15 years, and in that time, had developed the comfortable silence of men who understood that words were tools, not decorations. Tommy watched Chuck with barely disguised fascination. "He ever talk about, all those movies and stuff?" "Nope," Hank replied, threading wire through the fence post. "And I don't ask. That's part of why we get along." The distant rumble of engines broke the morning quiet. Not the familiar sputter of tractors or ranch trucks, but the aggressive growl of motorcycles, multiple motorcycles, pushing hard toward town. "Steel vultures," Hank muttered, squinting toward the dust cloud rising on the horizon. "They blow through every few months. More noise than substance." Chuck paused, hay bale in hand, watching the distant commotion. His expression remained neutral, but something in his posture changed. A subtle tightening, the stillness of a predator assessing potential danger. "They trouble?" Tommy asked. "They fancy themselves outlaws," Hank said. "Mostly they just drive up bar tabs and try to impress women who know better." Inside Maggie's diner on Main Street, Sheriff Linda Cortez sipped her coffee when her radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, steel vultures just crossed the county line. Looks like about 15 bikes." Linda set down her mug with a sigh. At 45, she'd been sheriff for 11 years and knew exactly what the bikers' arrival meant. A headache, at minimum. "Copy that. I'll be ready if they decide to make a scene." Through the diner window, she watched as the motorcycles thundered into town, their chrome flashing in the morning light. They parked haphazardly in front of the diner, engines revving unnecessarily before cutting out. Their leader swaggered in first. Rex "Iron Jaw" Dalton, a muscular man in his 30s with a meticulously maintained beard and arms covered in tattoos. Behind him trailed 6 of his crew, each trying to match his confident stride. "Morning, beautiful?" Rex called to Maggie behind the counter. "Coffee for my boys, and make it quick. We've got a lot of road to cover." Maggie, 60 and immune to such posturing, simply nodded and reached for the coffee pot. "This town gets more pathetic every time we pass through," Rex announced to no one in particular, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Like a retirement community for cowboys who can't ride anymore." Sheriff Cortez turned in her seat, coffee mug still in hand. "Morning, Rex. Planning a short visit, I hope?" Rex's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Just passing through, Sheriff. Unless we find something worth staying for." His gaze swept the diner, taking in the mix of farmers, ranchers, and townspeople. "Though I don't see much that qualifies." His crew laughed on cue, the sound hollow and practiced. "Keep it civil," Linda warned. "I'd hate for anyone's day to get complicated." Rex dropped a handful of bills on the counter, far more than needed for coffee. The gesture wasn't generosity, it was theater. See? Model citizens. As they gulped their coffee, Rex's eyes fell on the bulletin board by the entrance, specifically on a faded photograph of a rodeo competition from decades earlier. A much younger Hank Walker was captured mid-ride on a bucking bronco. "Who's the fossil?" Rex asked, pointing. The waitress glanced over. "That's Hank Walker. Local legend back in his day. Still runs the Walker Ranch east of town." "Legend, huh?" Rex snorted. "Wonder if he can still sit a chair, let alone a horse." One of his crew, a lanky man with a patchy beard, chimed in. "Those old-timers think they're tough because they wrestled cows 50 years ago. My grandpa was the same way. All talk about the good old days." Sheriff Cortez's radio crackled again. She answered it quietly, then stood, leaving money beside her half-finished coffee. "Behave yourselves, gentlemen. I'd hate to cut your visit short." Her gaze lingered on Rex, who responded with a mock salute. Outside, Linda scanned the street before sliding into her cruiser. These visits from the steel vultures never ended well. It was just a matter of where and when the trouble would start. At the feed store 2 blocks away, Hank and Tommy loaded 50-pound bags into the bed of Hank's weathered pickup. The young man hefted 2 bags at once, trying to hide his strain as he stacked them. "One at a time works just fine," Hank said mildly. "I've got it," Tommy insisted, his face reddening with effort. Hank shook his head. "Ain't about what you can do once. It's about what you can still do at the end of the day." Inside the hardware store across the street, Chuck Norris examined a selection of work gloves, with the focus of a man who understood that the right tool made all the difference. Through the window, he noticed the motorcycles parked in front of the diner, his gaze lingering on them thoughtfully. Back at the diner, Rex and his crew finished their coffee and headed for the door. "Let's check out this thriving metropolis," he announced. "Maybe we'll find something to liven up the day." As they exited, Rex spotted Hank and Tommy at the feed store. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well, look at that," he said, elbowing the biker beside him. "I think I just found our entertainment." The morning sun climbed higher as the bikers sauntered toward the feed store, their boot heels striking the pavement with deliberate heaviness. The sound drew the attention of shopkeepers and customers alike, faces appearing in windows up and down Main Street. Tommy noticed them first. "Mr. Walker," he said quietly, "we've got company." Hank straightened slowly, one hand still resting on a feed bag. His expression didn't change as the bikers approached, but his eyes, sharp despite his years, assessed each man with the careful attention of someone who had spent a lifetime reading both livestock and people. Across the street, Chuck Norris stepped out of the hardware store. He leaned against a post, a new pair of work gloves in his hand, watching the scene unfold with deceptive casualness. The morning that had begun with such quiet purpose now hung suspended in anticipation, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. In this small Texas town where little changed from day to day, something significant was about to shift. Rex Dalton crossed the street with performative swagger, his steel vultures fanning out behind him like a dark tide. Morning sunlight glinted off their belt buckles, chain wallets, and the occasional knife handle, each man a collection of carefully curated intimidation. Their leather vests bearing the Steel Vulture's emblem were immaculate despite the dusty roads they traveled, suggesting that image ranked higher than actual riding. "Well, would you look at this?" Rex announced, his voice pitched to Carrie. Live exhibit from the Cowboy Museum. Hank Walker continued loading feed bags, his movements unhurried. He acknowledged the bikers with a brief nod, the same spare greeting he'd give anyone in town, then turned back to his work. The dismissal, however unintentional, flicked at Rex's ego like a spur. He stepped closer, invading the buffer of personal space that rural men traditionally respected. "You deaf, old-timer? Or just rude to visitors?" Hank set another bag in the truck bed before answering. "Neither. Just busy." His voice carried no challenge, just the matter-of-fact tone of a man stating the obvious. Tommy Alvarez tensed beside him, young hands curling into fists. The boy's dark eyes flashed with indignation at the disrespect being shown to his mentor. "We're nearly done here," Hank added, placing a calming hand on Tommy's shoulder. Rex's gaze traveled from Hank's weathered boots up to his sun-faded hat. "You know, my daddy had a saying about old horses that can't pull their weight anymore." He glanced back at his crew with a smirk. "Said they're only good for glue." The Steel Vultures chuckled on cue, their laughter a practiced chorus. A few townspeople had stopped to watch from a cautious distance, discomfort evident in their posture. Across the street, Chuck Norris remained motionless against the hardware store post. His presence was unobtrusive yet somehow magnetic, drawing sideways glances from passers-by, who recognized him, but pretended not to stare. He watched the confrontation with the patience of a man who had seen countless conflicts begin this way and knew exactly how they could end. Walker broke 8 seconds on Mad Dog Sullivan back in '76. Tommy interjected, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "That bronc threw every other rider that season." Rex turned to Tommy as if noticing him for the first time. "Well, look at this. The museum has a tour guide." He leaned toward the young man. "Kid, you're backing the wrong horse. This town is dying, and these old-timers are going down with it." "That's enough." Tommy stepped forward, but Hank's hand tightened on his shoulder. "Easy, son," he murmured. "Some people confuse volume for substance." Rex caught the comment, and his smile thinned. "What was that? Got something to share with the class, cowboy?" "Just telling my hand here that we need to finish up." Hank's voice remained level. "You boys enjoy your visit to our town." The deliberate politeness seemed to frustrate Rex more than any insult could have. He moved closer, his height advantage allowing him to look down at Hank. "You know what I can't stand? Men who act tough their whole lives, then turn meek when someone younger and stronger comes along." A subtle shift rippled through the watching crowd. This was crossing a line. In rural Texas, respect for elders wasn't just courtesy, it was cultural bedrock. Tommy pulled away from Hank's restraining hand. "Mr. Walker could ride circles around." "Tommy." Hank's single word carried enough weight to halt the young man mid-sentence. "Feed won't load itself." Across the street, Chuck adjusted his stance slightly. The movement was minimal, but several townsfolk noticed. A few exchanged glances, a current of anticipation passing between them. Rex, emboldened by what he perceived as weakness, pressed harder. "That's right, kid. Listen to Grandpa. Wouldn't want him breaking a hip trying to prove something." One of the bikers, a heavy-set man with a shaved head, pointed at Hank's hands. "Look at those shakes. Bet he can't even hold on to his dinner fork." The tremor in Hank's right hand was barely perceptible. An early sign of Parkinson's he neither advertised nor denied. His expression remained unchanged, but something in his eyes hardened. Some things get harder with age, Hank acknowledged. Other things get easier, like knowing which fights matter. Before Rex could respond, the low rumble of a patrol car interrupted the tension. Sheriff Linda Cortez pulled alongside the gathering, her window rolling down with electrical precision. "Problem here, gentlemen." Her tone was conversational, but her eyes were sharp as she surveyed the scene. Rex stepped back, arms spread in exaggerated innocence. "Just making friends with the locals, Sheriff. Community outreach." Linda's gaze shifted to Hank. "Everything all right, Hank?" "Just loading feed," he replied, with a slight nod. "Nothing we can't handle." The sheriff studied Rex for a long moment. "Mr. Dalton, I believe I mentioned keeping things civil." "Absolutely civil," Rex assured her, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Just having a friendly chat with—" He paused, glancing at Hank's truck door where Walker Ranches was painted in faded letters. "Mr. Walker here about the good old days." Linda nodded slowly. "Well, chat's over. These gentlemen have work to do, and I'm sure you and your friends have places to be." The warning was clear beneath her professional tone. Rex recognized it and chose tactical retreat. "For now. We'll be around until tomorrow," he said, backing away with a theatrical bow. "Plenty of time to get better acquainted with all the local celebrities." As he turned to leave, his gaze landed on Chuck Norris across the street. For a brief moment, confusion flickered across Rex's face, recognition without full certainty. Chuck met his gaze with impassive calm, offering neither acknowledgement nor challenge. Rex hesitated, then motioned to his crew. "Let's roll. This exciting metropolis must have at least one decent bar." The bikers swaggered away, their departure as deliberately conspicuous as their arrival. Tommy waited until they were out of earshot before exploding. "You should have let me." "Should have let you what?" Hank interrupted. "Get yourself hurt trying to defend my honor. I stopped needing that kind of protection before your daddy was born." Tommy's face flushed. "They were disrespecting you. In front of everyone. They were trying to—" Hank corrected, resuming his work. "Whether they succeeded depends on how much their opinion matters to me." Across the street, Chuck finally pushed away from his post. He crossed to Hank's truck, his movement drawing eyes from up and down the block. "Feed's on sale," he remarked, nodding toward the store. "Noticed that?" Hank replied, stocking up. It was an utterly mundane exchange, yet the townspeople watching seemed to hold their breath. There was subtext here that outsiders wouldn't grasp. The shared understanding between two men who had seen enough of the world to know that most conflicts weren't worth the energy they consumed. Sheriff Cortez pulled away, circling the block to follow the biker's path at a discreet distance. As she drove, she made a call on her radio. "Keep an eye on the steel vultures. They're feeling theatrical today." Chuck helped load the last of the feed bags, his movements efficient despite his age. "They staying long?" he asked quietly. "Till tomorrow," they said. Hank closed the tailgate. "Looking to prove something?" Chuck nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. Some men built their identity on challenging others, constantly seeking to establish dominance. Men like Rex Dalton didn't just want to win, they needed witnesses to their victory. "Town fair tonight," Chuck noted. "Yep." Hank brushed feed dust from his hands. "Bigger audience." The two men exchanged a look that communicated volumes. The shared wariness of those who preferred to avoid trouble, but knew how to handle it when it arrived uninvited. Tommy watched them, frustration still evident in his tense shoulders. "They're just gonna get worse, aren't they?" Hank sighed. "Probably. Men like that usually do before they get better." "If they get better," Chuck added quietly. Hank nodded toward his truck. "Get in, Tommy. We've got fence to finish before sundown." As they pulled away, Chuck returned to his own vehicle. Neither man looked toward the diner where Rex and his crew had remounted their motorcycles and were now revving engines with unnecessary force. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The town settled back into its rhythm, but the morning's confrontation had left a residue of tension in the air. Everyone who had witnessed the exchange knew that Rex Dalton wasn't done. He had come looking for entertainment and found an audience. The only question was what form his next performance would take. At the far end of Main Street, a banner stretched across the road. Cottonwood Springs Annual Harvest Fair. Tonight. The event was modest by city standards. Some carnival games, local food vendors, a small livestock exhibition, and community awards. But in a town of barely 3,000, it was a highlight of the social calendar. It would also provide the perfect stage for whatever Rex had in mind. As Hank's truck disappeared around the corner, Chuck Norris stood beside his own vehicle, gazing thoughtfully in the direction the bikers had gone. His expression revealed nothing, but something in his posture, the balanced readiness of his stance, the measured alertness in his eyes, suggested he was preparing himself for what might come. The morning sun climbed higher, promising a scorching afternoon. In the Texas heat, tempers often flared like summer lightning, quick, dangerous, and impossible to predict where they might strike. By late afternoon, Cottonwood Springs had transformed. The vacant lot behind the courthouse, usually home to nothing more exciting than parked tractors during township meetings, now bustled with the modest energy of a small-town fair. Strings of lights crisscrossed overhead. Local vendors had set up food stalls selling everything from barbecue to funnel cakes, and children darted between carnival games run by volunteer firefighters and church ladies. Hank Walker moved through the crowd with the unhurried gait of a man who had nowhere particular to be and all evening to get there. He nodded at familiar faces, which was nearly everyone, and paused occasionally to exchange brief pleasantries. Tommy had disappeared to join friends his own age. The morning's tension, seemingly forgotten in the festive atmosphere. Near the small corral where the 4-H club was showing prize calves, Hank stopped to examine a particularly promising heifer. He leaned against the fence, his experienced eye assessing the animal's conformation with the automatic judgment developed over decades of ranching. "She'll breed well," came a quiet voice beside him. Hank nodded without turning. "Good bone structure. Strong hindquarters." Chuck Norris stood next to him, dressed much as he had been that morning. Work jeans, boots, and a simple button-down shirt. Nothing about his appearance suggested he was anything other than another local rancher. "Your fence finished?" Chuck asked. "Got the north section done. East can wait till Monday." The two men fell into comfortable silence, watching the youngsters lead their animals around the corral with varying degrees of skill. Neither commented when Sheriff Cortez passed by on her third circuit of the fairgrounds, her gaze constantly scanning the crowd. The rumble of motorcycles cut through the ambient noise of the fair like a thunderclap through casual conversation. Heads turned as the steel vultures rolled up to the fairground entrance, chrome flashing in the late afternoon sun. They parked in a neat formation, the precision of their arrangement suggesting practice at making entrances. Rex dismounted first, removing his helmet with theatrical flourish. He ran a hand through his hair and surveyed the gathering with the amused disdain of a man who considered himself above such simple entertainments but might deign to participate anyway. "Small town, small dreams," he remarked loudly enough to be heard by those nearest the entrance. "But maybe we can liven things up a bit." The steel vultures spread through the fair in loose formation, their black leather vests with the distinctive emblem making them easy to track through the crowd. They moved with calculated swagger, taking up more space than necessary, their laughter a few decibels too loud. Hank and Chuck exchanged a glance but remained where they were. Sheriff Cortez altered her path to intercept Rex before he'd gotten 20 feet into the fairgrounds. "Evening, Mr. Dalton," she said, positioning herself directly in his path. "Enjoying our little fair?" Rex's smile was all teeth. "Just got here, Sheriff, but I'm sure it's charming." "It is," she agreed. "And we'd like to keep it that way. Family event. Lots of children." "Are you suggesting we're not family-friendly?" Rex pressed a hand to his chest in mock offense. "We're just visitors enjoying local culture." Linda's expression didn't change. "Good to hear. Because if anyone disrupts this event, they'll be enjoying local culture from inside my jail until arraignment on Monday." Rex raised his hands in exaggerated surrender. "Crystal clear, Sheriff. We're just here for the funnel cake and heartwarming community spirit." Linda held his gaze a moment longer, then stepped aside. "Enjoy the fair, gentlemen." As she walked away, Rex's smile faded. He scanned the fairgrounds with more purpose now, gaze moving methodically through the crowd until it landed on Hank and Chuck by the corral. The smile returned, sharper than before. "There he is," Rex murmured to his companions. "Our cowboy from this morning." The steel vultures altered course, moving through the crowd toward the corral. People instinctively made way, conversations pausing as they passed. By the time they reached Hank, a subtle bubble of space had formed around them, fairgoers sensing the potential for conflict and creating distance. "Well, if it isn't the Walker Museum exhibit," Rex announced, positioning himself directly in Hank's line of sight. "Judging livestock? Or just reminiscing about when you could still climb on one without help?" Hank turned slowly. "Evening," he said mildly. "Enjoying the fair?" The polite response seemed to irritate Rex more than anger would have. "It's quaint," he replied. "Like something out of a time capsule. Or a retirement home social." Nearby conversations quieted as people tuned into the exchange. Chuck remained beside Hank, his posture relaxed but alert, his expression unreadable. "Small towns move at their own pace," Hank said. "Suits some folks better than others." Rex stepped closer, deliberately invading Hank's personal space. "You know what I can't figure out? Whether you're actually this boring, or if age has just beaten all the fight out of you." A murmur ran through the growing audience. Disrespecting an elder, particularly one as well regarded as Hank Walker, violated community norms at a fundamental level. "Not everything's a fight," Hank replied, his voice still even. "Unless you're looking to make it one." "Maybe I am," Rex said, lowering his voice to a theatrical near whisper. "Maybe this town could use some excitement. A reminder of what happens when the old guard can't defend their territory anymore." Chuck shifted his weight slightly, the movement so subtle it was nearly imperceptible. But Rex caught it, his gaze flicking sideways. "Your bodyguard seems twitchy," he remarked. "Friend of yours?" "Neighbor," Hank said simply. Rex turned his attention fully to Chuck, studying him with narrowed eyes. "You look familiar." Chuck met his gaze without expression. "Got that kind of face." Something sparked in Rex's eyes. A flash of recognition not quite crystallizing into certainty. He shook it off and returned his focus to Hank. "Tell you what, cowboy. Why don't we give these good people some real entertainment?" He gestured expansively to the gathered crowd. "A friendly contest. Old school versus new school." Tommy appeared at the edge of the crowd, pushing his way forward with adolescent determination. "Mr. Walker doesn't have to prove anything to you," he called out. Rex's smile widened. "Look, your tour guide's back. But he's wrong. In this world, everyone has to prove themselves. Every day." He turned to address the onlookers directly. "Don't you all want to see if your local legend still has what it takes?" The crowd's reaction was mixed, uncomfortable murmurs alongside reluctant curiosity. Human nature made it difficult to turn away from potential conflict. even when better judgment suggested otherwise. Sheriff Cortez materialized at the edge of the gathering. "Everything all right here?" Rex raised his hands in a gesture of innocence. "Just proposing some friendly competition, Sheriff. No harm in that, right?" "Depends on the competition," Linda replied dryly. Rex turned back to Hank. "Simple enough. Arm wrestling. One match. Winner gets bragging rights." A strange quiet fell over the crowd. The challenge was simultaneously mundane and laden with symbolism. A direct test of strength between youth and age, arrogance and humility. Hank's expression didn't change, but those who knew him well caught the subtle tightening around his eyes. The slight tremor in his right hand was more pronounced now, noticeable enough that Rex's gaze dropped to it momentarily. "Not really my kind of contest," Hank said finally. Rex's laugh was sharp. "Afraid to lose in front of your neighbors? Or just afraid to confirm what everyone already knows? That your time is long past?" The calculated cruelty of the taunt rippled through the onlookers. Tommy surged forward again, but Chuck stopped him with a nearly imperceptible hand gesture. "That's enough." Sheriff Cortez stepped closer. "Mr. Dalton, I believe I was clear about disrupting the fair." "It's just conversation, Sheriff," Rex protested, his innocent tone belied by the gleam in his eyes. "And a sporting invitation. No law against that." Linda glanced at Hank, concern evident in her expression. She had known him her entire life. He had taught her to ride when she was 8, and recognized the complexity of his position. Accepting Rex's challenge risked both physical injury and public humiliation. Declining it allowed Rex to paint him as weak or fearful. "Perhaps someone else would like to accept on the town's behalf," Rex suggested, his gaze sweeping the crowd theatrically before settling on Chuck. "What about you, neighbor? Care to step in for your friend here?" The atmosphere shifted subtly. Those locals who recognized Chuck straightened with sudden interest. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. "Is that?" "I think it is." "No way." Rex caught the change in energy, his confidence wavering momentarily. He studied Chuck more carefully, the nagging sense of recognition growing stronger. "Unless you're also past your prime," he added, the taunt lacking his previous certainty. Chuck met his gaze evenly. "Everyone has their day," he said quietly. "And everyone meets their match eventually." Something in his tone, the calm certainty of a man stating simple fact rather than making a threat, caused Rex to take an involuntary half-step back. "So that's a yes?" Rex recovered quickly, glancing at his crew for support. "Or are you all talk too?" Chuck remained silent, his stillness somehow more powerful than any movement could have been. The crowd held its collective breath, the fair's ambient noise seeming to fade into the background as the confrontation reached its tipping point. Rex, committed now and unwilling to back down in front of his crew, pushed harder. One simple contest. Prove you're not just another washed-up has been hiding out in this backwater. Hank turned to Chuck, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent communication born from years of neighborly understanding. "Your call," Hank said quietly. "But he's not worth the trouble." Chuck nodded, almost imperceptibly. Then, with deliberate calm, he turned away from Rex and toward the corral, effectively dismissing him. The insult of being ignored hit Rex like a physical blow. His face flushed, control slipping for the first time since his arrival in Cottonwood Springs. "That's it?" he demanded, voice rising. "You're both just going to walk away? Prove everything I said about this town and its pathetic excuses for men?" Neither Hank nor Chuck responded, their attention seemingly focused on the young handler leading a Hereford calf around the corral. Rex's control snapped. He stepped forward and grabbed Hank's shoulder, spinning the older man around with unnecessary force. "I'm talking to you, old man." The movement happened so quickly that many in the crowd missed it. One moment Rex's hand was on Hank's shoulder. The next, Chuck had somehow materialized between them. No one saw him move. He was simply there. Rex's wrist caught in a grip that made the younger man's eyes widen with sudden pain. "Don't touch him," Chuck said quietly. The 3 words carried more weight than Rex's entire repertoire of threats and insults. They weren't delivered with anger or even particular emphasis. Just the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating an immutable natural law. Rex tried to pull away, but Chuck's grip remained firm. Not punishing, not aggressive, simply immovable. "Let go of me," Rex demanded, his voice lacking its previous confidence. Chuck released him instantly, stepping back with casual ease. "Happy to," he said. "As long as we understand each other." Rex rubbed his wrist, confusion and anger warring in his expression. He looked from Chuck to Hank and back again, trying to process what had just happened. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he finally managed. A small smile touched the corner of Chuck's mouth. The first real expression he'd shown all day. "Just a neighbor," he replied. "Looking out for the peace and quiet we came here to enjoy." The simple statement carried an undercurrent that even Rex couldn't miss. The biker's eyes narrowed as his gaze moved more carefully over Chuck's features, the nagging familiarity finally crystallizing into recognition. "Wait a minute," he said slowly. "You're standing right here," Chuck interrupted mildly. "Enjoying a local fair until someone started causing problems." The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the palpable tension. Phones had appeared in several hands, their owners sensing something worth documenting. Rex, suddenly aware of his audience, recovered his bravado. Well, he said, a new edge in his voice. "Looks like Cottonwood Springs has been hiding a celebrity." He turned to address the onlookers. "Does everyone know who's living among them? Hollywood's favorite tough guy, playing cowboy in real life." The comment drew scattered murmurs, but not the reaction Rex had clearly hoped for. Most of the locals already knew exactly who Chuck Norris was, and respected his choice to live quietly among them without fanfare. "So, how about it?" Rex pressed, sensing his advantage slipping. A real challenge now. Not arm wrestling. Something more fitting. He gestured to the open area near the corral. "Show these good people if you're the real deal, or just another actor who needs a stunt double." Sheriff Cortez stepped forward again. "That's enough, Dalton. This stops now." Rex ignored her, his focus entirely on Chuck. "What do you say? 1 round. No rules. Just 2 men settling things the old-fashioned way." His smile returned, sharp with challenge. "Unless your reputation is all smoke and mirrors." The crowd had gone completely silent, the only sounds coming from the distant carnival rides and the livestock in the corral. Everyone waited for Chuck's response, the tension thick enough to cut. Chuck studied Rex for a long moment, his expression giving away nothing. Then he glanced at Hank, who offered the slightest of shrugs, the rancher's equivalent of, "Your call." Finally, Chuck turned to Sheriff Cortez. "Linda," he said quietly, "we were just leaving." He nodded to Hank, and the 2 men turned away from Rex, moving unhurriedly toward the fair exit. The dismissal was so complete, so casually delivered, that Rex stood frozen for a moment, unable to process being so thoroughly ignored. "That's it?" he called after them, voice cracking slightly. "Running away?" Neither man looked back. The crowd began to part for them, creating a path that somehow felt like a gesture of respect rather than avoidance. Rex, desperate now to salvage the situation, played his final card. He moved quickly to block their path, positioning himself directly in front of Chuck. "I always knew you were fake," he said loudly. "All those movies, all those fights, just camera tricks and editing. The real Chuck Norris would stand his ground." For the first time, Chuck stopped. He regarded Rex with the patient expression of a teacher faced with a particularly slow student. Real strength, he said quietly, isn't about proving anything to anyone, especially not to someone who wouldn't recognize it if it stood right in front of him. The words landed with precision, striking at the heart of Rex's insecurity. For a brief moment, the biker's facade cracked, revealing the uncertainty beneath his cultivated image of toughness. Chuck stepped around him and continued walking, Hank at his side. The crowd's silence held for 3 heartbeats, then broke into a soft murmur that somehow conveyed more approval than applause could have. Rex stood alone in the space they'd left, his crew hanging back as if hesitant to be associated with his humiliation. The moment stretched painfully until Sheriff Cortez approached him. "I think it's time for you and your friends to call it a night," she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Rex's face hardened. "This isn't over," he said, loud enough for Chuck and Hank to hear as they reached the fairground exit. Chuck paused briefly at the exit, turning just enough to meet Rex's gaze one final time. He said nothing. Didn't need to. The look alone was enough to make several of the steel vultures take involuntary steps backward. Then he was gone, disappearing into the gathering twilight with Hank beside him. Rex stood rigid, humiliation burning through him like acid. He turned to find every eye in the fairground upon him, witnessing his failure. Even his own crew seemed uncertain, their usual bravado dimmed by what had just transpired. "Show's over," Sheriff Cortez announced to the crowd. "Let's get back to enjoying the fair." But Rex knew the truth. The show wasn't over. It had barely begun. Night fell over Cottonwood Springs, transforming the fairgrounds with the soft glow of string lights and the colorful flash of carnival rides. Families with young children had begun to drift homeward, leaving behind a crowd predominantly composed of teenagers, couples, and the steel vultures, who had retreated to a corner near the beer garden to regroup. Rex Dalton nursed a plastic cup of domestic beer, his expression darkening with each passing minute. The earlier confrontation played on repeat in his mind, each review stoking his anger hotter. Being dismissed, being ignored, cut deeper than any physical challenge could have. "Maybe we should just move on," suggested one of his crew, a newer member named Davis, who hadn't yet learned when to keep his opinions to himself. "Hit Lubbock by morning. Find some real action." Rex's gaze could have stripped paint. "Nobody asked you." "Just saying." "Well, don't." Rex crushed his empty cup. "That old man and his neighbor made me look like a joke. Nobody does that to me." Nobody. The steel vultures exchanged glances, sensing the dangerous edge in their leader's voice. Most had ridden with Rex long enough to recognize when his pride had overridden his judgment. "What exactly are you thinking?" asked Mac, Rex's unofficial lieutenant, a bear of a man with graying temples, who sometimes served as the voice of reason. Rex leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I'm thinking it's time to show this town what happens when you disrespect the steel vultures." "That sheriff's watching us like a hawk," Mac warned. "And if that really was Chuck Norris." "Chuck Norris!" Rex spat the name. "He's what, 80? And hiding out in this nowhere town because he knows his time is done. Just like that rancher." His eyes narrowed. "They're symbols of everything wrong with this country. Old men who won't step aside when their time is up." The rant carried the rehearsed quality of a grievance, long nurtured. For Rex, this had clearly become about more than a public snub. "So what's the play?" asked another vulture, eager to move from talk to action. Rex's smile returned, sharp with malice. "We find out where Walker lives. Pay him a midnight visit. Nothing too serious, just enough property damage to send a message." Mac shook his head. "That crosses a line, Rex. The line got crossed when they humiliated me in front of the whole damn town," Rex snapped. He surveyed his crew, gauging their reactions. "Anyone else have objections? Anyone else gone soft?" The challenge hung in the air. One by one, the vultures shook their heads or looked away, unwilling to oppose their leader even as doubt clouded several faces. "That's what I thought," Rex said. "We finish here. Wait until things quiet down. Then take a little ride out to the Walker Ranch." His gaze hardened. "And if his neighbor wants to get involved, all the better." Across the fairgrounds, Sheriff Linda Cortez watched the bikers huddle with practiced suspicion. 20 years in law enforcement had taught her to recognize trouble brewing. She keyed her radio. "Jim, I need you to swing by the Walker place tonight. Regular patrol. Nothing obvious. Just keep an eye out." "Expecting trouble?" came the deputy's response. Linda watched Rex's animated gestures, the way his crew leaned in to catch his lowered voice. "Let's just say I'm being cautious." She pocketed the radio and continued her circuit of the fairgrounds, pausing to chat with locals, her presence a deliberate reminder of law enforcement's watchful eye. Near the funnel cake stand, Tommy Alvarez huddled with 3 friends his age, their conversation intense and punctuated with frequent glances toward the steel vultures. "We should warn Mr. Walker," Tommy insisted. "Those guys aren't just going to ride away after what happened." His friend Miguel shook his head. "The sheriff's on it. Besides, what are you going to do against those guys?" "It's not about fighting them," Tommy argued. "It's about making sure Mr. Walker isn't caught by surprise." "Dude, did you miss who his neighbor is?" Another friend, Ethan, cut in. "Chuck Norris. Actual Chuck Norris. I think they'll be fine." Tommy wasn't convinced. "My dad says even tough guys get old. Can't hurt to have more eyes watching out." "Your dad also says the government puts chemicals in the rain," Miguel pointed out. "That's different." Tommy straightened as he spotted Rex and 2 vultures heading toward the parking area. "Look, they're splitting up. Something's happening." Before his friends could respond, Tommy was moving, trailing the bikers at what he considered a discreet distance. His wiry teenage frame allowed him to weave through the crowd efficiently, though his attempts at stealth would have amused any trained observer. Rex and his companions reached their motorcycles and huddled together, examining something on a phone screen. Tommy edged closer, straining to hear their conversation over the ambient fair noise. "County records show it here," Rex was saying, pointing at the screen. "Walker Ranch. About 5 miles east of town. And Norris's place? Adjacent property to the north, according to the tax records. Separate driveways. 1/4 mile apart." Tommy's stomach tightened. They were planning something. Something that required knowing exactly where Mr. Walker lived. "We go at midnight," Rex continued. "Most of these hicks will be in bed by then. Quick in and out, some broken windows, maybe a fire in the barn. Nothing that screams steel vultures, but enough to make the message clear." "And if they're home?" one of the others asked. Rex's smile was cold. "Even better." Tommy backed away carefully, then turned and sprinted toward the sheriff's last known position. His heart hammered against his ribs, fear for his mentor overriding any concern for his own safety. He found Sheriff Cortez near the livestock exhibition, speaking with the local veterinarian. "Sheriff!" Tommy skidded to a stop, breathing hard. "They're going after Mr. Walker. Tonight. I heard them planning it." Linda's expression sharpened. "Slow down, Tommy. Who's going after Hank?" "The bikers. Rex and his guys. They looked up where the ranch is. They're planning to damage property. Maybe start a fire." The words tumbled out in a rush. They said midnight. The sheriff studied him for a moment, assessing his credibility. What she saw must have convinced her, because she immediately keyed her radio. "All units, be advised we have credible information about potential criminal activity targeting the Walker Ranch tonight. I need patrols redirected to that area effective immediately." She turned back to Tommy. "Did they specifically mention harming Hank or Chuck?" Tommy shook his head. "Not exactly. but Rex said it would be even better if they were home. Linda's expression hardened. I need to find them. Where did Hank and Chuck go after they left the fair? I don't know, Tommy admitted. Home, probably. Mr. Walker usually turns in early. The sheriff nodded. All right. I'm going to handle this, Tommy. You stay at the fair with your friends, that's not a suggestion. Tommy's face fell. But I should warn them. What you should do, Linda interrupted firmly, is let law enforcement do its job. I know you care about Hank, but the best way to help him is to stay safe and out of the way. She squeezed his shoulder reassuringly before striding toward the parking area, already issuing more instructions over her radio. Tommy watched her go, conflict evident in his expression. He had done the right thing by alerting the sheriff. She was trained for this. She had deputies and authority and firearms. But she didn't know Mr. Walker like he did. Didn't understand the old rancher's stubborn pride, his reluctance to call for help even when he needed it. Decision made. Tommy headed for the fair exit. His ancient pickup truck, a 16th birthday gift from his father, was parked 2 blocks away. If he hurried, he could reach the Walker Ranch before the sheriff organized her patrols, just to make sure Mr. Walker was properly warned. It wasn't disobedience, he told himself. It was loyalty. Meanwhile, 5 miles east of town, Hank Walker sat on his porch in comfortable silence with Chuck Norris. 2 rocking chairs, 2 glasses of iced tea, and the vast canopy of Texas stars overhead. No words needed. The confrontation at the fair seemed distant now, reduced to its proper insignificance by the immense night sky and the familiar rhythm of cricket song. Finally, Hank spoke. Didn't mean to drag you into town drama. Chuck's soft chuckle carried in the still air. Been in worse spots. True enough? Hank took a sip of tea. Still. Appreciate you keeping things from escalating. Chuck nodded, acknowledging both the thanks and the unspoken recognition that he could have handled the situation very differently. Think they'll let it drop? Hank asked after another comfortable silence. No. Chuck's response was immediate and certain. Men like that don't walk away. Their ego won't let them. Hank sighed. Figured as much. He gestured toward the darkness beyond the porch. Told Tommy to stay in town tonight. No sense having him mixed up in whatever might come. Smart. Chuck agreed. Boy's got good instincts, but he's still learning to control his reactions. Reminds me of myself at that age. All impulse, no patience. The comparison drew a knowing smile from Chuck. We all start somewhere. A distant rumble interrupted the night's quiet. Not thunder, but the distinctive growl of a pickup truck pushing its aging engine too hard. Speaking of impulse, Hank murmured as headlights appeared on the long driveway leading to the ranch house. The truck slid to a stop in a spray of gravel, and Tommy Alvarez leaped out before the engine had fully quieted. Mr. Walker, he called, rushing toward the porch. They're coming! Rex and his gang. They're planning to damage the ranch tonight. Hank rose slowly, setting his glass aside. Take a breath, son. Then tell me exactly what you heard. Tommy gulped air, then related his eavesdropping with the detailed recall of youth. As he spoke, Chuck also stood, his posture shifting subtly from relaxed to alert. Sheriff knows? Chuck asked when Tommy finished. The boy nodded. I told her first. She's sending patrols, but I wanted to make sure you were warned directly. Hank exchanged a glance with Chuck. Appreciate the thought, Tommy, but you should have stayed in town as instructed. I couldn't just… I know, Hank interrupted gently. But part of becoming a man is learning when to follow orders, even when your heart tells you otherwise. Tommy looked down, chastened but unrepentant. I was worried about you. Hank's expression softened. And I'm grateful. But now, I need you to head back to town. Whatever happens here tonight isn't for you to handle. But I can help. You already have, Chuck said quietly. You've brought us information. That's valuable. Now the best help you can give is to ensure we don't have to worry about your safety." The calm authority in his voice seemed to reach Tommy in a way Hank's familiar instructions couldn't. The boy straightened, suddenly conscious of being addressed directly by Chuck Norris. "Yes, sir," he managed. "But what will you do?" Hank's smile was thin. "We'll manage." Old doesn't mean helpless. A new sound intruded on the night. The wail of distant sirens, growing steadily louder. "That'll be Linda," Hank noted. "She can escort you back to town." Tommy looked ready to protest again, but something in Chuck's steady gaze stopped him. Instead, he nodded reluctantly. "Just be careful, Mr. Walker." "Always am," Hank assured him, though his eyes had hardened as he gazed out into the darkness beyond the porch lights. "Some lessons need teaching more than once, is all." Sheriff Cortez's cruiser pulled up alongside Tommy's truck, lights flashing but siren now silent. She emerged with the controlled urgency of a professional expecting trouble. "Hank," she called, approaching the porch. "Got some intelligence about potential trouble heading your way tonight." "So we heard," Hank replied, nodding toward Tommy. Linda's expression flickered between annoyance and understanding when she spotted the teenager. "I see my instructions weren't clear enough." Tommy looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Boy was concerned. Hank said mildly. "Can't fault his heart, even if his judgment needs work." The sheriff sighed. "Well, he's going back to town now, and that is absolutely non-negotiable." She fixed Tommy with a stern look. "My deputy is parked at the end of the drive. You will follow him directly to your parents' house. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am," Tommy mumbled. "Good." Linda turned back to Hank and Chuck. "We've got patrols set up on all roads leading here. If Rex and his crew try anything, we'll intercept them." "Appreciate that," Hank said. "But this is my property. My problem." Linda shook her head. "Not how it works, Hank. Threatening harm or property damage is a crime, and preventing crime is my job." She glanced at Chuck. "No offense to your particular skill set." Chuck's slight smile acknowledged the reference. "None taken. I've got deputies setting up a perimeter," Linda continued. "They'll stay out of sight unless needed." A silent communication passed between the three adults, the shared understanding that while law enforcement would handle things officially, some situations resolved more effectively through unofficial channels. "Tommy?" Linda turned to the teenager. "Time to go. Now." The boy hesitated, looking to Hank for any sign that he should stay. Finding none, he finally nodded. "I'll check on the cattle in the morning," he said, attempting to salvage some dignity through responsibility. "See you then." Hank agreed, his tone gentle but firm. Tommy walked reluctantly to his truck, casting one last worried glance over his shoulder before climbing in. The ancient engine protested, then caught, and he backed carefully around the sheriff's cruiser before heading down the driveway. Linda watched until his taillights disappeared, then turned back to the two men on the porch. "For the record," she said, "I'd prefer to handle this by the book. Intercept them before they reach private property, charge them with conspiracy, and escort them to the county line with a warning not to return." "Clean solution," Chuck acknowledged. "But," Hank prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation in her tone. Linda sighed. "But men like Rex Dalton don't learn from official warnings. They just get smarter about not getting caught next time." She looked between them. "And sometimes justice needs to be a bit more immediate to be effective." The admission hung in the air, neither man rushing to fill the silence that followed. Finally, Chuck spoke. "Your deputies should maintain their perimeter, but perhaps give us a little time before responding to any disturbances on the property itself." Linda studied him. Professional caution, warring with personal trust. "You understand I can't officially agree to that." "Understood," Chuck said simply. Another moment of silence passed. The three of them bound by unspoken agreement and the complex intersection of law, justice, and community protection. "I should get back to my position," Linda finally said. "Radio, if you need immediate assistance." "Will do," Hank assured her, though something in his tone suggested such a call was unlikely. As the sheriff returned to her cruiser, Chuck gazed out into the darkness beyond the porch light's reach. "They'll come from the south," he said quietly. "Less visibility from the road. More cover." Hank nodded. "Edge of the property runs along Willow Creek there. Provides good concealment right up to the outer pasture." "How many access points?" "Just the one bridge for vehicles. But there's a footpath that crosses the shallow part of the creek about a quarter-mile west." Chuck absorbed this information with a slight nod. "They'll scout first. 1 or 2 men on foot, checking for police presence." "Likely," Hank agreed. "What are you thinking?" A ghost of a smile touched Chuck's lips. "I'm thinking it's a quiet night for a walk." Understanding passed between them. The wordless communication of men who had seen enough of the world to recognize when direct action was preferable to waiting for trouble to arrive. Hank rose from his rocking chair with the careful movement of a man who knew his body's limitations but refused to be governed by them. "Reckon I should check the south fence line," he said casually. "Been meaning to repair that section near the creek." "Good night for it," Chuck agreed, standing beside him. "Could use some air myself." The two men descended the porch steps with unhurried purpose, each moving in harmony with the night and the land they called home. No words were needed as they separated. Hank toward the barn to collect tools that might or might not be used for fence repair. Chuck melting into the shadows beyond the house lights, as if he were simply another element of the Texas night. The ranch settled into deceptive stillness. The cricket song and distant lowing of cattle, creating a peaceful soundtrack that belied the tension humming beneath the surface. On the main road, Sheriff Cortez killed her cruiser's lights as she pulled into position behind a stand of mesquite trees. She keyed her radio. "All units maintain position, and radio silence unless emergency." "Repeat. Maintain radio silence." She hesitated, then added, "And maybe give the Walker property a little breathing room unless called." Sometimes local issues resolve themselves best locally. The night deepened around the Walker ranch, stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the human drama about to unfold beneath their distant light. Half a mile from the Walker ranch, Rex Dalton crouched behind scrub oak, surveying the property through night vision binoculars. The green-tinted landscape revealed a modest ranch house with wraparound porch, barn, equipment shed, and cattle pens. A single porch light burned, but the house windows were dark. "Looks quiet," he muttered to Mac, who knelt beside him. "No sign of police." "Still think this is a bad idea," Mac replied. "Breaking the law over wounded pride. It's about respect. Consequences." Rex's tone was sharp. "Davis and Levi are checking the creek crossing. Once they confirm it's clear, we move in." His radio crackled. "Creek crossing clear. No sign of law. Path leads right to the back pasture." "Roger that. Hold position. We're on our way." They moved through the underbrush with practiced stealth toward the creek where Davis and Levi waited. The night had grown cooler, a light breeze carrying the scent of water and livestock. "4 more are holding position with the bikes," Rex explained in a hushed voice. "If anything goes wrong, there are extraction." "Extraction," Mac muttered. "This isn't a military operation." Rex ignored him, outlining their plan to vandalize the ranch equipment and damage the house. The men crossed the shallow creek in single file, water gurgling softly around their boots. Rex led them along a tree line, stopping suddenly with a raised fist. "Something's off." "Too quiet." "Seems normal to me," Mac replied. "No ranch dogs. Most of these places have at least one mutt raising hell when strangers approach." Maybe they don't keep dogs, Davis suggested. Or maybe they're expecting us, Levi countered, military instincts alert. Rex pushed forward regardless. Let's go. They darted across open ground toward the barn, making it halfway before a voice spoke from behind them. Nice night for a walk. They froze, then spun around. Chuck Norris stood precisely where they had been moments before, at the edge of the tree line. Despite the darkness, he was clearly visible. Not hiding, just standing calmly with his hands at his sides. How the hell? Rex began. He circled behind us. Classic ambush technique. Levi cut in. Chuck smiled slightly. No ambush. Just a neighbor noticing trespassers. Rex recovered quickly. Well, if it isn't the washed-up action hero. Out past your bedtime, aren't you? Could ask you the same, Chuck replied evenly. Long way from the main road. We're just out for some fresh air. Public land. Creek's public, Chuck acknowledged. You crossed it 30 yards east. Everything since then is private property. Rex's hand drifted toward his knife. I wouldn't, Chuck said quietly. The simple statement froze Rex's motion more effectively than a shout. Something in Chuck's tone, absolute certainty, penetrated even Rex's anger-fueled confidence. Wouldn't what? Rex challenged, though his hand stopped. Escalate a trespassing charge into assault with a deadly weapon, Chuck replied mildly. First is a misdemeanor. Second is a felony. We're just passing through, Rex insisted. No law against that. With what purpose? Came a new voice. The bikers turned to find Hank Walker standing near the barn entrance. A shotgun held casually at his side, pointed at the ground. Surrounded, Mac muttered. Rex's face hardened. Two old men don't constitute surrounded. Technically accurate. Chuck agreed, taking a step forward. But practically irrelevant. For the first time, genuine uncertainty flickered across Rex's face. The confrontation wasn't playing out as anticipated. There was no fear from the older men, no confusion, no calling for help. Just calm preparedness. Sheriff's been alerted, Hank added conversationally. Deputies are stationed at all road exits. Your friends with the motorcycles have already been located. You're bluffing, Hank shrugged. Maybe. Care to test it? The standoff stretched, tension building in the cool night air. Davis shifted nervously while Levi maintained a combat-ready stance. You plan to damage my property, Hank continued casually. Maybe set a fire. All because your ego got bruised in town. Seems like a high price for a lesson you could have learned for free. What lesson is that? Rex snarled. That true strength doesn't need to announce itself, Chuck answered. That respect is earned, not demanded. Save the fortune cookie wisdom, Rex spat. 4 against 2. Old men against men in their prime. You do the math. Chuck's smile reached his eyes. Math was never my best subject. But physics. That I understand well. Rex, Levi said urgently. We should go. Now. Nobody's going anywhere until I say so, Rex insisted, though his voice lacked certainty. The force required to move an object, Chuck continued casually, depends on its mass and desired acceleration. But the force required to stop an object? That's where things get interesting. The academic tone contrasted with the predatory quality of his movement as he took another step forward. Despite himself, Rex stepped back. We leaving or not? Davis whispered urgently. Not without delivering our message, Rex declared, turning to Hank. Your property stays intact tonight, old man. But this isn't over. Actually, Chuck said quietly. It is. He moved then, not lunging, not charging, just a sudden fluid advance that covered the distance between them before the bikers could process the change. Davis panicked first, swinging wildly and meeting nothing but air as Chuck shifted slightly. The missed punch carried the young biker forward, off balance, directly into a minimal palm strike that sent him sprawling. Levi reacted with military precision, dropping into a fighting stance and launching a disciplined combination. Chuck deflected each strike with small circular movements, never blocking directly, just redirecting force with economy of motion. A swift sweep took Levi's legs from under him. Mac backed away, hands raised. "I'm out. This wasn't my idea." That left Rex standing alone, watching his crew dismantled with casual ease. Humiliation burned through him, followed by rage. He reached for his knife. The blade never completed its arc. Chuck's hand clamped around Rex's wrist, applying precise pressure to nerve points. The knife fell from suddenly numb fingers. "The funny thing about Hollywood," Chuck said conversationally, maintaining his grip, "is that they actually tone down reality, make the fights last longer." He applied slightly more pressure, causing Rex to gasp. "Real confrontations tend to end quickly." Rex struggled futilely. "Let go of me." "Happy to. As soon as we understand each other." From the barn entrance, Hank watched with patient expression, the shotgun still at his side, hadn't needed to raise it. "You broke the law coming here tonight." Chuck continued calmly, despite Rex's struggles. "Trespassing, criminal intent, likely weapons charges. You can't prove anything. Don't need to. Sheriff's got your friends in custody by now." Chuck leaned closer. "But here's what's going to happen instead of formal charges. You're going to leave Cottonwood Springs tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. And you're not coming back. You can't make that stick." "No?" Chuck's grip shifted, sending a new wave of pain up Rex's arm. "I have friends in every law enforcement agency in Texas. One call, and your club gets special attention every time you cross a county line in this state." The threat was delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence that Rex recognized its authenticity. "But more importantly," Chuck continued, "you're going to leave because deep down, you know you're outmatched. Not just physically, in every way that matters." The words struck deeper than the pain. Chuck released him suddenly, stepping back with the same fluid grace. Rex stumbled, rubbing his wrist. "This isn't over," Rex said. But the declaration sounded hollow. "It is," Chuck replied simply. "You just haven't accepted it yet." Headlights swept across the scene as Sheriff Cortez's cruiser pulled into view. "Right on time," Hank noted, checking his watch. The sheriff emerged, taking in the scene with a professional glance. "Everything all right here, gentlemen?" "Just fine, Sheriff," Chuck replied. These gentlemen were leaving. Rex calculated his options and found them severely limited. "Your associates with the motorcycles have been escorted to the county line," Linda informed him. "They'll be waiting at the gas and go on Highway 83. The message was clear. The steel vultures had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. Their planned show of force turned into a humiliating retreat. "I'll take them there myself," the sheriff continued. "Unless there's something else we need to discuss?" Rex's jaw worked silently, pride warring with self-preservation. Finally, he shook his head. "Nothing to discuss. We're leaving." As they passed Hank, Rex paused for one final attempt to salvage his dignity. "You got lucky tonight, old man. Having your attack dog here to fight your battles." Hank regarded him thoughtfully. "Son, the luckiest thing that happened to you tonight is that Chuck was here instead of me handling things." He patted the shotgun. "I'm not nearly as gentle." Morning arrived with golden sunlight spilling across the Walker Ranch. Dew glistened on grass and fence wire, transforming the ordinary into something momentarily magical before the climbing sun burned it away. Hank moved through his morning routine with habitual efficiency. Coffee brewed, horses fed, equipment checked. His hands showed the slight tremor that had become more pronounced in recent years. but they remained sure in their work. Chuck arrived as Hank was finishing his second cup of coffee on the porch, carrying a small toolbox and wearing work gloves. "Thought I'd help with that east fence," he said by way of greeting. Hank nodded. "Coffee's fresh." They settled into discussing weather and cattle prices, mundane details of rural life, with no mention of the previous night's excitement. To an observer, it might have seemed as if nothing unusual had occurred. The distant sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. Tommy's ancient pickup appeared, dust billowing behind it as he pushed the engine harder than necessary. "Right on time," Hank noted, checking his watch. "Boy's punctual. I'll give him that." Chuck's slight smile acknowledged what went unsaid, that Tommy was early, because his curiosity couldn't bear waiting another minute. Tommy leaped out, barely remembering to shut off the engine, and jogged toward the porch. "Mr. Walker," he called. "Are you okay? What happened last night?" Sheriff Cortez escorted those bikers all the way to the county line, but she wouldn't tell me anything except that everything was handled. Hank set his coffee cup down. "Morning to you too, Tommy." The gentle rebuke made the young man pause. "Sorry." "Good morning, Mr. Walker." "Good morning, Mr. Norris." He removed his cap as a belated show of respect. "So." Tommy shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Did anything happen?" Hank and Chuck exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. "Not much to tell," Hank said finally. "Some trespassers were encouraged to leave. Sheriff helped them find their way." Tommy's face fell with obvious disappointment. "That's it? But I heard they were planning to damage property. Maybe even start a fire." "Plans change," Chuck observed mildly. "But did they try anything? Was there a confrontation?" Hank sighed, recognizing the boy needed something more substantial. "They came onto the property uninvited. We had a conversation about the merits of leaving promptly. They made the right choice." Tommy's eyes widened. "A conversation? With 4 bikers? In the middle of the night?" "Communication is important," Chuck commented, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. "Wow," Tommy breathed. "And nobody got hurt? Might be a few bruised egos?" Hank allowed. "Nothing that won't heal with time and better judgment." Tommy nodded slowly, his expression shifting from disappointment to understanding. "So you handled it without needing to make a big deal about it." "Some things don't need an audience," Chuck said quietly. The simple statement carried weight beyond its words, and Tommy seemed to absorb it deeply. For perhaps the first time, he glimpsed something essential about manhood that had nothing to do with displays of strength. "The cattle in the south pasture need moving today," Hank said, changing the subject. "Thought we'd start there." Tommy straightened. "Yes, sir. I'll get the horses ready." He turned to go, then paused and looked back at Chuck. "Mr. Norris, do you think sometime you might show me how to?" He trailed off, unsure how to phrase his request. "How to handle situations without escalating them," Chuck suggested. Tommy nodded eagerly. "Sure," Chuck said. "It starts with understanding that real strength never needs to prove itself. The rest is just details." The young man considered this, then smiled with genuine appreciation. "Thank you, sir." Meanwhile, in town, the Steel Vultures gathered at the bus stop outside the Gas and Go. Their bikes had been impounded overnight. A paperwork issue, according to the sheriff's department. Rex sat apart from the others, nursing both wounded pride and a wrist that still ached from Chuck's grip. None of his crew approached him directly, sensing the volatility of his mood. Mac finally broke the silence, addressing the group rather than Rex specifically. "Bus to Lubbock comes at 10. From there we can sort out getting the bikes back." "Never should have stopped in this backwater," muttered Davis, still sporting a bruise. "Leader's call," Levi reminded him quietly, with a pointed glance toward Rex. The comment hung in the air, drawing nods from several other vultures. Rex looked up, sensing the shift in his crew's attitude. "You got something to say, Levi?" "Say it to my face. Poor intelligence, poor planning, poor execution, completely avoidable situation that compromised the entire group. You questioning my leadership? Evaluating it?" Levi corrected. As any responsible team member should. The confrontation crystallized in the harsh morning light, with the entire crew watching. "Last night was a setup," Rex insisted. "We were outnumbered. 2 men, Mac countered. 2 old men against 4 of us, and we never stood a chance. Because you backed down. We'd be in county lockup facing actual charges instead of just losing a night's sleep and some dignity." Sheriff Cortez's cruiser pulled up alongside the bus stop. She rolled down her window. "Morning, gentlemen. Just checking that you're all set for departure." "Just waiting on the bus," Mac replied, stepping forward as de facto spokesman. Linda nodded. "Your motorcycles will be released once the paperwork clears, probably by this afternoon. We can arrange to have them transported to Lubbock." "Appreciate that, Sheriff. I'll give you the details before we leave." Rex stepped forward. "This is harassment. You had no right to impound our property." Linda's expression cooled. "Would you prefer I process the trespassing and attempted vandalism charges instead, Mr. Dalton? Because that paperwork is already prepared." Rex faltered, his bluster meeting the immovable object of legal authority. Back at the Walker Ranch, the day's work proceeded with steady rhythm. Hank, Chuck, and Tommy moved cattle, repaired fence, and checked water levels in the stock tanks. During a break, Tommy asked the question that had been on his mind all morning. "Mr. Walker, why didn't you just call the sheriff right away last night? Why handle those bikers yourselves?" Hank considered the question. Sheriff was informed. She was doing her job by securing the perimeter. "But you and Mr. Norris confronted them directly," Tommy pressed. "Some lessons need teaching up close." "What lessons?" Chuck spoke up. "That actions have consequences. That strength doesn't always look like what people expect. That respect is earned through conduct, not demanded through intimidation." Tommy nodded slowly. "So it wasn't about punishing them or getting revenge?" "Revenge is a luxury nobody can really afford," Hank said. "Costs too much in the long run." "Then what was it about?" "Balance?" Chuck answered simply. "Restoring it when someone tries to take more than their share." By mid-afternoon, Sheriff Cortez made one final stop at the Walker Ranch. "Your visitors are well on their way to Lubbock," she informed them. "Those motorcycles will follow once they've had time to reconsider their life choices." "Creative law enforcement," Chuck observed with a slight smile. "Sometimes the system needs flexibility to work properly," Linda replied. She turned to Tommy. "And you, young man, next time I give you an instruction to stay in town, I expect it to be followed. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am." Crystal clear. As evening approached, the 3 shared a simple meal on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in dramatic swathes of orange and purple. "Mr. Norris," Tommy began hesitantly, "all those movies you made, all those fights, was any of it real?" "Movies are entertainment," Chuck replied. "They're meant to look exciting. Real situations are usually shorter, less dramatic, and focused on ending things quickly rather than putting on a show." "Like last night?" "Like last night. No spinning kicks. No extended exchanges. No dramatic music. Just efficient movement and psychological leverage." Psychological leverage. Understanding what drives the other person, and using that knowledge to control the situation. Tommy nodded. "So real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about controlling the situation without necessarily hitting at all," Chuck finished. "Though being capable of effective action if needed is certainly part of the equation," Hank added. "Most conflicts are won or lost before the first move is made." It's about presence, about certainty, about knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. And not needing to prove it to anyone, Chuck added. Tommy looked between the two men. I want to learn that kind of strength. Not just how to fight, but how to be. That's where it starts, Hank said quietly. With wanting the right thing for the right reasons. As darkness settled over the ranch, the three remained on the porch, mostly enjoying the peaceful night. The previous day's confrontations had already taken on the quality of stories rather than immediate concerns. In time, those stories would join the rich tapestry of local lore, but the essential truth would remain. That sometimes, the quietest men are the ones most worth listening to, and that true strength rarely announces itself with noise and bravado. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.